organizer for the Teamsters here in the metropolitan area, Teamsters Joint Council, number 37. He's been doing it for about 13 years and a wealth of experience in getting to testify in Salem on important legislative issues related to our workers. We also have Pamela Loprest, who is a senior fellow at the Urban Institute, and I can vouch for her credibility and everything else, because she and I were roommates in college. So I'm delighted to have a good friend here to talk about her research. She's been conducting this research since I've known her, related to labor and workers and how we can improve the lives, particularly of disadvantaged people, through policy. And the Urban Institute focuses on actual research-based policy guidance. So it's a wonderful resource if you ever get a chance to take a look at their website. So why don't I let you start, Mark, to saying a few words about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm a 40-year plus, almost 41-year Teamster member. I was a truck driver for 29 years and have spent the past 13 years working for the Teamsters. I spent 3 years working for our international union as an organizer. I came to the Joint Council here in Portland, which is my hometown, because the opportunity was here to stay centrally located near my family. And I started off being the organizer at the Joint Council. The Joint Council of Teamsters, we represent, so people understand what we do, is the Joint Council coordinates the activities of the 9 local unions in the state and 23,000 members. And so my job initially here was as the organizer for the 9 local unions, and it has sort of morphed into additional responsibilities. I'm the political coordinator for the Joint Council, and I am the lobbyist, among other duties, just in administering the 9 local unions. I think that sums it up pretty well. Well, I should also mention I'm on the state task force in Oregon on autonomous vehicles and the impact that will have on workers, and trying to find a pathway to implement autonomous vehicles on the roads while protecting workers and ensuring that any workers who are displaced through this transition are dealt with in an equitable manner that makes them whole. I'm also on the state task force on artificial intelligence, which is primarily set up to prepare children now entering school and prepare them for jobs of the future that do not yet exist, developing curriculum and that sort of thing for the future, as well as, again, doing it in a way that protects workers and creates jobs that are good jobs. Back to you,
Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Now to Pam.
Hi. So as Karen said, I'm a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. We're a social policy research institute, non-partisan in Washington, D.C. And basically my whole career, I'm a labor economist, has been working on trying to research questions and provide evidence to policy debates so that individuals making policy decisions can use the best information to make those decisions. I work on the labor market and labor force and how to best provide both on the training side, help for workers to, as Mark was saying, be ready for the new jobs, transition from jobs, and be able to get live up to their potential, make the most in the labor market. But I also work on labor market policies that look at how to protect workers, how to ensure workers have benefits, and that there is fair and equitable treatment in the labor market for workers, and what kinds of policies might do that, and the impact of policies. So we evaluate training, we look at the impact of policies of all sorts, and as you can imagine right now, we're talking a lot about what the different impacts of both what the government is doing in the short term, but what they might do in the long term to help workers in this situation.
Okay, thank you, Pam. And let's go back to before this health crisis started, and maybe can you talk a little bit about the trends that you were seeing before the crisis?
Sure, if we can all remember back then. We were talking about things like in the economy with the lowest unemployment rates we had seen in decades, how there were so many workers who were in situations where they were not covered by employer benefits. In other words, didn't have health insurance, didn't have retirement benefits, didn't have paid leave, were working multiple jobs in order to make what might be considered a living wage to be able to support families. And so even in this really tight labor market, as we call it, something that we think of as being very positive for work, increasing wages a little bit, there's still a lot of inequity. And that inequity hit different groups of workers differently. There's many differences by race, ethnicity, immigrant status, and gender. And so even in a really good labor market, there were a lot of issues. Mark mentioned the impact of automation and of future changes in the structure of the labor market and work because of technology. And those are very much on our minds, and how they will differentially affect workers, in particular frontline workers, workers who maybe are making on the lower end of the wage scale.
And Mark, I'm going to jump back to you to talk about what were the, before this health crisis, what were the issues of most concern from your workers' perspective?
Boy.
I know it does feel like it was about a year ago, and it was only about a month or so.
Yeah, well, the concerns, I guess there's two different viewpoints you can take. My focus is on really on the work, on the impact that the environment has, the economic environment, the work environment has on our members specifically, as opposed to workers in general. But I would say that with regard to organized labor, the Teamsters being included in that, of course, we have organized labor in this country has been under attack for generations, through right to work legislation, through the Janus decision. It goes on and on and on, paycheck deception. And so, those have been challenges to our workers for many years, and we have been playing defense for a long time. I think that we are seeing now the equally challenging threat to work, and that is automation. And that's why I'm on these two task forces. I think that autonomous vehicles certainly poses a huge threat to us. My personal feeling is that the deployment of autonomous vehicles within the commercial industry is still a ways off. But we need to take this time we have now to do what we can to prepare for the impact we'll have on our members, and automation in general. I would say, from my standpoint as a Teamster, I see it entering the truck driving industry. I see it entering the warehousing industry, and the Teamsters. I believe nationally we have more, although we're associated as a truck drivers union, we have more members who work in warehousing than we do in trucking. And automation has the potential and will likely impact warehousing as dramatically as it will anything else, and maybe more dramatically than anything else. And so I vision a technological revolution here, maybe in the next 10 years, where we will see mass disruption of work through automation, whether we see it, and we're seeing it in grocery stores now, and through the retail food industry, we're seeing it all over. And my personal feeling is that this is a situation we have to deal with nationally. I think that we have to find a way to protect workers. A lot of these jobs, whether it's warehousing, trucking, are jobs that are available to people who do not have the benefit of a college education. The average over-the-road freight truck driver is 55 years old and doesn't have any more than a high school education. And if we close off those jobs, and this is a state, Oregon is a state that really prides itself in career technical education, and we could very easily close off a lot of career pathways for folks who do not have the benefit of a college education, and I don't know where we send them. There are so many people who do not have the access to college for any number of reasons, and this is a great alternative to college for finding a middle class job. That's a real concern to me.
That is also a concern for me as well. I've been on the Oregon Youth Development Council, and one of the issues that we talk a lot about is how to find pathways for young people, and that's defined different ways, but basically up to the age of about 24, good pathways to good jobs, and certainly unions are a wonderful avenue for that.
Well, if you don't mind, if I add, and there is a difference, I have to say, between union workers and non-union workers, obviously. And a union truck driver, I would imagine their average wage or their average annual salary is around $100,000 a year. They also have, as a result of union benefits, they have affordable health care or full coverage health care, and they have a secure pension and a secure retirement future. And as my predecessor used to say, social justice is achieved through a union contract. There is, under a union contract, there's no discrimination based on anything other than seniority. That's what prevails. And I believe that, of course, I'm a long-term Teamster and a long-term union member, but I really believe that if our communities will try to find ways for the easiest pathway or an easier pathway for workers to find union membership, I think a lot of the social challenges that we face now will be dealt with. I mean, affordable housing is affordable if you have a really good paying job, that sort of thing.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
There we go. So Pam, you were talking a little bit about looking at autonomous vehicles and automation generally. What has your research been showing?
So, I really agree with Mark about some of the areas we need to think about. I really think we focus kind of on two sets of issues. One is how to improve access to education and skills, which does not just mean four-year degrees, but actually the kind of training and like you mentioned, the CTE system there, all different kinds of educational opportunities and opening those up to individuals in jobs of the future, and especially for youth, but even for across the spectrum in people in jobs that are going to be disappear because of automation. We need to think about that transition and how to best help individuals get the training that's going to help them succeed. But we also have to think about on the other side, the work protection side and the labor laws. And really it's important to understand, you mentioned that a Teamster driver gets paid, can get paid $100,000 a year, but really like a large percentage of our workforce is earning very low wages. In the country, more than 20% of workers are earning less than $15 an hour. Our national minimum wage is, $7.35. It's just very, these are very low wages, and people really, that's why so many people have to work multiple jobs or supplement with informal work. We also need to think about, we talked about automation and warehouses and a lot of drivers being delivery. In fact, we've done studies of the retail sector, and larger percentage of the retail sector are really those individuals who are doing short-term driving of delivery. That's actually a big part of that sector too. And one of the issues facing those workers is working for companies that have become, where the supply chain and the way that the work is organized has become very fractured. And so there you will have a large company that wants to get its goods out. They hire a different company that runs the warehouse, which hires a different company that runs the external delivery. And it gets all pushed down to smaller companies with pretty razor thin profit margins that have incentives to really treat workers not well, either in low pay, but also in having difficulty in meeting the basic safety and worker protection laws. And the structure of labor changing that way really has a big impact on workers. But there are things that can be done, and there is movement to try and create laws that give responsibility to large employers for their subcontract and supply chain workers, so that they do not push off the responsibility yet get all the profit. So some of that is just, if you think of an example of people working in warehouses where automation is used to track their every movement or how productive they are, how fast. We've seen studies that show that one really discriminates against older workers or against workers with disabilities. It also creates a lot of stress and can cause bad health outcomes in the workforce. So we have to think about how can we protect workers in all of these different ways at the same time that we're doing this, trying to get youth to be able to get skills to move into other work as work disappears. So there's room to work on both sides.
May I ask you a question, Pam?
Sure. That's okay.
Sure.
What are your thoughts? I mean, I think are kind of touching on two issues that are of concern to us at the Teamsters, and one would be the misclassification of workers as independent contractors, and the other is sort of the app-based economy, the .com economy, where I can see we are seeing an increase in LTL freight delivery. That's less than a load. That's like local deliveries and that sort of thing. And I can see that being transitioned to sort of an app-based delivery system where someone has an app on their phone, they have a truck, and they get a notice that there's a job opening or a load to haul, and people may bid on that, and it's a race to the bottom where the lowest bidder gets the job, that sort of thing. Have you looked into anything like that, or considerations or thoughts on that?
Yeah, both an app-based model, but also in people operating as independent contractors, but for one large employer. So they are instead of being an employee who does delivery person, they are their own independent contractor. They only work for that one employer, and yet they do have a lot of these regulations and restrictions. You have to deliver by this certain time, you have to deliver this many within one day, and everything that makes it very difficult and can get the pressures to be more and more on pushed onto the workers, receiving, you know, docs and pay if you don't deliver within a certain time frame or a certain amount of packages, et cetera, et cetera. So some of it is like an app-based Uber kind of platform thing. Some of it can be actually as an independent contractor for one company. When we think about gig workers or people who are working on electronic platforms, we really should think a little bigger and think about all of the different independent contract work that is done where individuals, and Mark mentioned misclassification. It's this gray area where people, you're kind of your own boss, but you really don't have control totally over your work. And so whether you are an employee or not, it makes a big difference for whether you're covered by worker protections, by the protections on health and safety, minimum wage and hours, all sorts of different workers' compensation, a lot of different kinds of laws. And it can be beneficial to employers to not have to, you know, deal with those kind of
Certainly.
They're costly. So there are many discussions going on now. There's the law in California, AB 5, that it's tried to rejigger the definition of employer to try and get rid of misclassification, but it's really, I think, something that's rolling out, being tried in a lot of different states and a lot of different ways to think about it. And there's a lot of discussion at the federal level about ways amongst organizations trying to say what the federal level could do differently, to think about it. It's really partly because there is a change, right? The structure of work has changed. And so some of those old traditional relationships are different and need to be rethought. So some of it will be litigated, and we're trying to also study what some of the differences are, even just the difference between who holds the responsibility for proving you're a worker, whether the worker holds that responsibility or the employer. So there's a lot of differences there. But it's an important area as we go forward, and there may be more electronic mediated application platform kind of work, and just more of these kind of arrangements.